Welcome everyone to the April ISSA Columbus, Georgia meeting. This is the monthly meeting for everyone. Today we have Lonnie Best here to go over big breaches, big data. So I'm very interested to hear this topic. And with that, Lonnie, we'll keep it short and sweet and pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I did want to say thank you to Andrew Warnick, who reached out, looking for, someone to speak to you guys this month for your ISSA meeting. So it's a pleasure for me to be able to do this. So the topic today, big breaches need big data, importance of telemetry and partnerships in the age of SUNBURST and beyond. So some of this is probably going to seem like a no-brainer to a lot of you guys. I just want to preface it with that. However, I know that a lot of organizations, as I've discovered, especially in my past, years working for an IT services provider, and then when things like SUNBURST, the SolarWinds hack came across, a lot of organizations struggled with how do I respond to this, and didn't really have great understanding. So I thought it was a good topic to enter with. The first thing that I'm going to talk about today is really going to be about Rapid7. I'm not trying to sell you anything here, but we do a lot with the security community. So I want to kind of highlight a lot of, what we do with the broader, security community as a whole. And then we'll do a little bit of diving into, the importance of telemetry and partnerships. With that, just a little bit about myself. I decided to go against the tradition of putting who am I here. I'm a Windows guy, so I chose to go with the Echo username here, so there you go with that. As I said, Lonnie C. Best. The C is important because my father was Lonnie E. Best, and so that's always been a differentiator. I am a manager of detection and response services at Rapid7. So basically, I work in our managed detection and response security operations center based in Arlington, Virginia. I've been with the company for about 3.5 years. I started off as a detection and response analyst in the SOC, and then worked my way up into my current role, which I've been in for about about a year and a half now. So it's been wild ride, awesome opportunity. I've seen a lot of cool stuff. On top of that, I am a Army signal officer. I've been serving in the National Guard for about 10 years. Started off in tactical communications, worked my way up and did my stints as, company commander of a network support company. And I'm currently transitioning from the Georgia National Guard into the Virginia National Guard as an information operations planner. So I've been kind of actively in that role since September. But still technically part of the Georgia National Guard. I am very familiar with Columbus, Georgia. So I did my time at Fort Benning. My unit that I'm currently technically assigned to, is based out of Fort Benning. So I'm very familiar with Columbus, Georgia. So it's great to be able to talk to you guys. I'm from Augusta, Georgia. Spent the first 30 years of my life there before moving up to Maryland with my wife. I hold a Master of Arts in Business and Organizational Security Management. I've got a bunch of certifications because, why wouldn't I? I am a member currently of the Central Maryland ISSA. Prior to moving to Maryland, I was a member of the Greater Augusta chapter of the ISSA. So if you guys are familiar with folks like Doug Burks, who does Security Onion, those were the people that I was associated with out there. Then I have a background in nuclear security. So I did physical security for a nuclear power facility for a year and a half or so in a past life. And then after that, I moved into IT information security. And amongst all of that, I have a background as a craft beer writer. So there's where the beer comes in. I spent a number of years before I was analyzing, endpoint forensics and things, analyzing beer and writing about that. So that was always a good time. The picture that you see of me there, I was at the 2013 Brew Your Cask Off event at Sweetwater Brewing in Atlanta, where I was a judge. And I was not a loser, contrary to what the photo would suggest. That was actually created for like the Biggest Loser of the event. But that was always a great time. So currently married. I have an amazing wife and a couple of fat old cats who have been with me for a long time. And, you know, my free time, I love traveling, especially to Europe. Try to go there as much as I can. Had two canceled trips last year because of the pandemic. I've got another one coming up here in August that I'm hoping doesn't get canceled, but we'll see how things go. I love visiting breweries, of course, and then purveyor of blast beats. I am a drummer of the metal variety. So if any of you folks are metalheads here, I'd love to chat about that. So just to get right into it, like I said, I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Rapid7 for, you know, the broader security community. We have a whole lot of stuff here. We're very dedicated to, you know, security research and sharing, you know, our findings with, you know, the broader community for the greater good of security as a whole. And there's a bunch of different initiatives that we have to try to do that. You know, so this is kind of a little overview of a lot of the projects and things that we have, and I just want to touch on all of these. And there's some that aren't listed here that I'll go over as well. So the first of these is going to be, you know, where we get a lot of our information from that we're able to share back with the community is from a Rapid7 customer base. So we have, you know, we're kind of a quote unquote product focused company. That's how we make our money. But we also do services. So we have a product called Insight IDR, which is our SIM solution. And then we have our managed detection and response service, which is kind of built on top of that. And of course, we have an incident response team in-house who's aligned with us in managed services, and they do, you know, tons of engagements every year with sort of retainer and off the street customers, in addition to our MDR customers. So we glean a lot of information from the engagements that we perform with our client base, and all of that feeds back in to the not only folks who you know are using our Insight IDR platform, you know, and our other products, but it also feeds back into just the community as a whole, because we use our platform, you know, the blog, the Rapid7 blog and things like that to share findings. And I'll get into a little bit of that a little bit later, but that's where a lot of the depth and breadth of what we see on a regular basis, that's where that comes from. Additionally, you know, we are, as you can see on the side here, we are a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance. What that enables us to do is share our, you know, intelligence with the broader community as a whole. We are actually an affiliate member, and we have board and committee seats with Cyber Threat Alliance. So that puts us in a really good position to share our threat intelligence and information with, you know, a global base. Probably what we're most well known for at Rapid7 is Metasploit framework. So if you're unfamiliar with that, that's the most widely used penetration testing framework in the world. It's used by tons and tons of penetration testers, you know, script kiddies, guys getting into the industry, and of course, it's pretty commonly used by attackers. I'm always kind of excited when I'm working on an engagement, whenever I see an attacker come in and drop, you know, a Meterpreter payload, because it's like, hey, it's a nod to us as an organization, but it kind of sucks because they're using it against us. But we glean a lot of information from the, you know, 200,000 plus contributors to the Metasploit framework. It is still an open source framework, even though Rapid7 acquired it a number of years ago. It's still fully open source. We have contributors all over the world who are constantly contributing to the over 3,000 exploits that are available in Metasploit. And so what that allows us to do is, you know, kind of see, you know, on a broad base what, you know, people are digging around for and the sort of exploits that are available, and that feeds back into, you know, the broader community. I wanted to lean into an additional project that we just stood up last year. It's not represented here on this slide, but it's a project rather that we stood up to sort of align with not only Metasploit, but the fact that we are a CVE numbering authority, and it's called Attacker KB. What Attacker KB is it's a knowledge base of, you know, CVEs and basically kind of gives rankings to what is most useful from an attacker's perspective. So our, the worldwide community is able to contribute their perspectives to this project on different CVEs and different vulnerabilities, and their usefulness to from an attack standpoint. So they'll give it a ranking of, I don't have it in front of me. I can't describe exactly what the ranking structure is, but they will give rankings based on how useful those exploits are, because not all vulnerabilities are considered equal. Not all exploits are considered equal. Some things are more useful based on a number of factors, and that's where the community comes in and can give us that perspective. And then, of course, that's a public resource that is available to everyone. So you can take that back to your organization if you look up something, and if a new CVE comes out, or maybe an old existing CVE that applies to something that you may have in your organization, some product, some device, whatever it may be, you can go and look that up in the attacker KB and can maybe make business decisions based around how useful might this be to an attacker. So it's really cool, and we just I believe it's in general availability now. It may still be in beta, but it's an awesome resource that we've made available to the broader community. Additional things that we have. So I'm just going to kind of pivot toward the if you look on the slide here, to the threat hunters. So the threat hunters, of course, are us. To going back to the original point of all of the data that we gleaned from our managed services incidents and our incident response engagements. We also do regular threat hunting across all of our customer base. And same way, that feeds back into the value that all of our customers get, and not only our customers, but the broader community, because of the things that we may find and then release through the Rapid7 blog and other resources. I've already kind of touched on it, vulnerability disclosure. We are a CVE numbering authority, so we are able to discover and assign CVE numbers to different vulnerabilities, not only in our products, but also other products and software devices, things of that nature that our researchers find that don't fall under maybe another CVE numbering authority, their purview. So we definitely give back to the community there. And then two of our really cool projects, the last two that I'm going to highlight here, are Project Heisenberg and Project Sonar. I'm going to tie back in Project Sonar in particular a little bit later. But what these are, Project Heisenberg is a network deployed globally of honeypots, low interaction honeypots that we're able to basically, see when attackers are probing, malicious actors, or maybe it's security researchers, whoever. But when people are probing the internet, and they touch some of these honeypots, we're able to kind of glean ideas around what are they doing. This comes into play a lot in sort of big incidents, like some of the ones I'm going to go over today. But we can take that data and look at when something is well known or a new CVE is released, are attackers trying to actively exploit that? Are they probing around the internet? And we can then feed that information back out to the public to kind of give an idea, sort of like with Attacker KB, an idea of what's actually going on in the real world and what's happening out in the wild, and how it may affect you. Maybe how critical is it that you patch the server? So that's one of our pretty cool research initiatives that we make available to the public. And lastly, Project Sonar, kind of the opposite of Project Heisenberg's. Project Sonar is global internet-wide scanning that Rapid7 performs. That's a really, really pertinent research project that we do anytime something new or interesting, maybe old, that attackers are trying to actively exploit. Let's say we discover attackers are doing things via Project Heisenberg, or maybe in some incident response engagements. We can go back to Project Sonar and say, how many systems worldwide are actually vulnerable to X, Y, and Z that these attackers are either actively exploiting, or maybe they're probing around for, and then feed that back out into the community to give a better perspective on what's actually going on. So before I go on, I just want to put it out there. Are there any questions around these initiatives. I know this was something that Andrew Warnick had kind of mentioned was maybe of interest to you guys in the Columbus ISSA. As these, how are we giving back to the community? And hopefully I painted a good picture of that. But are there any questions before I move on?
You mentioned there was a scanner that
yes.
is open. I guess that's the old Nessus, right?
So, basically, Rapid7, we actually have our own vulnerability management solution. It's a direct competitor to Nessus. It was originally Nexpose, currently Insight VM, and that's the basis for Product Sonar, I believe, is what we use for internet scans. They're only internet-wide, I believe, service scans. So we're just kind of seeing what's open, and trying to get that information out there. We're not doing anything, that's trying to actively exploit or do anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not. We're not.
I saw it out there, and my brain will be Nessus.
Of course, right. and that's totally understandable. But yeah, we've actually been in the vulnerability management game for a really long time, longer than pretty much anything else. So that was before Metasploit was ever acquired. That was before we had the Insight platform. But yeah, vulnerability management is one of our big areas. But that one's really the one that feeds into what we provide to our broader community. We also, it's not really listed here, but we do take information that we glean from our vulnerability management only customers as well, because all that data feeds back into actually, if I give the next slide here, all of these initiatives really feed into what we put out in our quarterly threat reports, and for instance, our industry cyber exposure reports. So the industry cyber exposure report actually just came out a week or so ago. And it's targeted, looking only at Fortune 500 customers. But these, are really meant to give an idea of, well, of course, in the threat reports, those are meant to show what have we seen over the last quarter or maybe over the last year in our year-end reports. What were attackers doing? What were the trends? And then, of course, with the cyber exposure reports, that's kind of, what is the posture of some types of organizations, whether it's by industry or in this case, Fortune 500. What are the cyber postures actually looking like in some of these, broader organizations? So really interesting data. If you have any time, if you haven't done it before, please go, Google these reports. The threat reports come out quarterly. And a lot of that, like I said, comes from the work that we actually do on my team. And the industry cyber exposure reports is really, sort of focused around, what our labs and research teams have seen. So it's really good stuff there. You may find, something that may be beneficial to you in your own industry and in your own organization. All right, so all of that being said, I wanted to talk about a couple of sort of big ticket items that we've seen in the recent past. So the one I wanted to start off with is SUNBURST or SolarGate or Nebelium, SolarWinds hack, call it what you will. It's been named a bunch of different things over time. Since it was first, uncovered and publicly disclosed initially by FireEye and Microsoft. You're probably all familiar with it at this point, but what was it? It was a backdoor version of a component of the SolarWinds Orion platform, specifically a dynamic link library file titled solarwinds.orion.core.businesslayer.dll. What was it? It was, some threat actor that has been presumed to be Russia. It's actually been, the United States government has publicly called out Russia for this and the SVR. But they backdoored the code, or they installed a backdoor in the code for this particular DLL. And then, any customers who use SolarWinds Orion platform who updated or downloaded this particular variant, or it was a number of versions of it that were vulnerable, they basically had a backdoor into their environment. So when it was disclosed in December of 2020 by FireEye, it had been in play in the wild for about 9 months. So starting with a release in March of 2020, and then it was publicly disclosed by FireEye, I think on December 13th of 2020. So quite a long time that was available. This was definitely a supply chain attack. It affected, software that organizations around the world use. Certainly wasn't the first big supply chain attack, at least not software based. If you think back to things like the Malwarebytes hack, from a while back, that affected a lot of organizations. But this one seemed to hit a little harder, and gained a little bit more prominence, and that was potentially because it affected 18,000 organizations, which is not really as much as the news media would have had you believe. So part of the problem with SUNBURST, or whatever you want to call it, was that news organizations really hyped it up. So going back to it, potentially affected approximately 18,000 organizations. But the way that the news media outlets were kind of spinning it was using, as you can see here with this snippet from Newsweek, they would really highlight the big folks in the world, the sort of Fortune 500 type customers, the government agencies, that were basically SolarWinds customers, not specifically SolarWinds Orion, which is what we know was the problem, but SolarWinds customers. So everyone believed, that if I'm using SolarWinds, am I hacked? So yeah, that's kind of where this led to. Oh my God, Russia hacked me. And that was partly because, like I said, these news organizations, were kind of blowing things out of proportion. And so organizations feared that they were targets of active exploitation because these news agencies failed to elucidate the difference between the existence of the backdoored SolarWinds Orion DLL and malicious actors actually taking advantage of that backdoor. So, what we saw in my organization, and I think a lot of other organizations saw this as well. If you are an IR firm, you undoubtedly, had your phone ringing off the hook. I know that we did. Was organizations identifying that they use SolarWinds first, any components of SolarWinds, but especially those who knew that they use SolarWinds Orion, kind of freaking out about this. And they were calling up, trying to seek incident response, thinking that they're hacked. Maybe they had seen in some of their DNS logs and things like that, there were these call outs to avsvmcloud.com, which was one of the known, initial indicators of the SolarWinds Orion, backdoor DLL being resident in your environment and establishing communication. So folks kind of thought, okay, if they got me, like I need IR, I need to do something big about this. And what we, the sort of stance that we took was we took in the information as it first came out, and we worked to distill that. We have, I hate using the term experts, but we have, our experts, within our organization. And of course, there are those, outside of, my own company who are doing the same thing, and having to, help organizations understand that, relax, you're probably not hacked by Russia. You're probably not a target. We were able to get some, initial intelligence from some of our industry partners about, behavioral type indicators that what were the attackers doing post exploitation? If they actually took advantage of this DLL, well, what were they actually doing? And some of the things we identify were, usage of wscript.exe to execute scripts, using the AD-find Active Directory utility in a renamed fashion with particular arguments. They were using sc.exe, the service creation Windows binary to execute commands against remote hosts, and, utilizing the thing that everyone does with encoded PowerShell commands, creating scheduled tasks with certain parameters, and so we were able to take all of this back and kind of let organizations know you're fine. You have this back door, but we don't have any indication of this. We were fortunate in that the way that we ingest data from our organizations, we have all of these customers, hundreds and hundreds of customers who we were able to actually go back and do targeted threat hunt against, going back to the date of the original compromise of SolarWinds Orion. But this kind of brings it down to oh my God, Russia hacked me. Probably not, but how can you tell? Okay, and this goes back to really what this part of this talk is about, and that's that you need data, you need telemetry. So this is where I was bringing up, and this might seem like a no-brainer, is that you need to log your data. You need something like a SIM, or at least some sort of data aggregation, and you need certain, you need to be collecting certain types of important data that may be important to query for a security incident. If you weren't doing that, then how would you be able to go back the 9 months that that this has been in existence and try to figure out, was I hacked? And the fact is, if you weren't collecting, the telemetry from all of your different sources in your environments, there's no way for you to be able to tell. You would have to assume at that point that you had been breached. And that's what we discovered. These two things, going back to the need to have telemetry and the need to have partnerships, was the fact that if you didn't have someone who could distill the information for you and let you know exactly what did this mean, then you would probably assume breach. But also, if you didn't have the data, then you would naturally have to assume breach, because you would have no way to go back and figure out, what does everything suggest. And this was, critical with the SolarWinds Orion hack. Is you need big data. You need to have months and months and months of data available, ideally easily parsed and queryable, to be able to go back and figure out, what exactly may have happened in your environment. But of course, like I said, also the ability to have someone to take that information, because a lot of organizations, especially if you have small security teams, and maybe you have, more junior folks who are working on your teams, and maybe it's a C-suite level person who read a news report and asked, hey, do we use SolarWinds? And you go, yes. And they go, oh my God, we have to spin up all of our resources to manage this thing. You don't have someone to really figure out what does it all mean and what are we really looking for. Then naturally it's going to cause a bigger problem than you're probably actually dealing with. What we faced in our particular circumstances was we did these threat hunts back across the last 9 months of available data for folks. In some circumstances, we did a little bit deeper dives, doing actual endpoint forensics and looking for signs of compromise. And out of the several dozen organizations that we had identified, either they came to us and said, hey, we use SolarWinds Orion, can you help? Or we discovered that they had indicators of, in particular, the AVS VM cloud connections in their environment, and alerted them to the fact that they had it. We found 0 out of dozens and dozens of organizations that actually, had experienced any kind of a breach. So the point being, you need data, you need telemetry, and you need to have the adequate partnerships to give you threat intelligence and an understanding of how does this actually affect your organization. All right, so I want to move on to the next point, which is going to be the very recent Microsoft Exchange 0 days that I'm sure you're probably familiar with, because it's also big news as of just a few weeks ago. So what was it? So on February 27th, we actually started seeing attacks against our customer base using what I deem our old friend, the China Chopper web shell. China Chopper has been around for a long time. Attackers have been using it since I think at least 2013. It crops up every now and then. It seems like it's never going away. But we were detecting these starting on the 27th of February, and we really got our eyes on it because these were being targeted against multiple different organizations, and the common factor there was that the organizations that were being targeted by this, they were all running, the servers that were being exploited were all running on-premises Microsoft Exchange. So we looked at you know, how are these web shells potentially getting uploaded, and how are these attackers getting in these environments? And we looked at, well, what CVEs, you know, are in existence for Microsoft Exchange. At the time, there was a CVE 2021-24085 for Microsoft Exchange on premises. This was a spoofing vulnerability that was disclosed on February the 9th. So just, you know, a couple weeks prior. It was pretty fresh. And there was publicly available proof of concept exploit code. And what this CVE was, it was where an authenticated attacker could leak a certificate file that would result in cross-site request forgery. And this could potentially, of course, you know, theoretically lead to a compromise of that application, that web application being exchanged. And then, you know, subsequently, you know, maybe arbitrary file uploads or remote code execution. So on the, you know, once we started seeing these about on the 28th, we really, you know, dug into it, and we're like, okay, this is something that's happening across our customer base. And it's something that's, you know, it seems pretty valuable. We've got this recent CVE. So let's go ahead and get this information out. So what we did is we reached out to Rapid7 Labs and worked in conjunction with them to not only draft up a blog post and communications to our customers, but we wanted to get this out to the public. We had the Rapid7 Labs look at the geographic distribution of Exchange servers that were vulnerable to this particular CVE, which is the graphic that you see there. They were very quickly able to do that because of the data that they had via Project Sonar. And we were able to work up communications, blog posts, get it out, you know, to the world. This was on either March 1st or 2nd when we got this out. So we were pretty happy, you know, like I said, giving back to the community and getting it out there for everyone. And then 3 days later, after we initially started detecting these, Microsoft was like, nah, we actually got 4 0 days that we've been sitting on for, you know, a number of months. So here you go. And they dropped that bombshell. So we then knew at that point, and other organizations around the world had started, you know, seeing an uptick in these same sorts of attacks, that this is most likely related to these 0 days, some of which could be chained for remote code execution or file uploads, but some of them I think with direct RCE capability. But either way, it was pretty big. And, you know, we started seeing that organizations all over the globe started getting affected by this. And, you know, it sucked. But again, we were able to pretty quickly use all, you know, various of these resources that I outlined, you know, earlier, to be able to pull all this data together and to get it out to the public, which was, you know, pretty exciting. It's always fun to sit there and, you know, watch these. It's not fun for the organizations that are getting compromised, obviously, but it's fun to get this stuff together and, you know, put it out there for the greater good. Just of note, this was posted yesterday by Bob Rudis. He's our chief data scientist, and he actually went through and discovered that, well, if you read the news yesterday, you know, you probably know that the FBI and DOJ performed an operation to go in United States-based Exchange servers who had particular web shells that were, you know, had a certain naming convention and whatnot. They were able to go and issue commands to basically delete those web shells off of the Exchange servers. Kind of questionable tactics, but, you know, I'll give it to them. And but at the end of the day yesterday, Bob Rudis went through and used again the data that we collect with Project Heisenberg and Project Sonar, and discovered that there's still a number of OWA Exchange servers out there that had been compromised, and then were now being pulled into botnets. So and used as infrastructure there. So kind of interesting, but again, just an example of what we like to do at Rapid7 to kind of bring to light the exposure that we have across the world. So all that said, I want to go ahead and kind of just kind of bring it back into what I've been referring to through all of this, and what organizations kind of need for success. And the first, as I mentioned, you got telemetry. So what kind of telemetry do you need? Things like telemetry from your endpoints. So you're logging from your servers, Active Directory, your workstation endpoints, command line logging, PowerShell logging. All of these things can feed in to help you not only detect things in real time, but also go back and perform threat hunting and identify potential compromise, after the fact as things come to light. Your network devices. So all of the telemetry from your switches, your routers, firewalls, web proxies, wireless access points. All of these devices provide a lot of valuable info. If you have IDS or IPS, those types of things provide immensely valuable info. To be able to go and, like I said, not only detect, but to go back and do targeted hunting and look backs. Same with your network services, DHCP, DNS, very valuable, as we discussed with the SUNBURST. One of the most key points of telemetry that you would have needed there would have been your DNS logs. And do you have 9 months of DNS logs to go back and look for these indicators? And if you didn't, you would just, like I said, naturally have to assume that you had been potentially targeted. Applications. So if you've got any sort of web applications, IIS logs, any custom applications that you may have developed in-house, these things are all very important to be able to send to a centralized logging source and be able to query later for potential compromise. Those things like this are very important for, let's say if you've got a service that's running a checkout, because you host some sort of an application that processes payment cards and things like that. I've been working on one just this past week where we had a customer, pretty big customer, who has a payment processing solution. They thought that they weren't storing payment card information on these devices. They found out from a third party that some of these credit card numbers had leaked on the dark web, and the common thread was that they had been used at this organization to purchase things. And as we dug into it, we found that it turned out that their application was actually storing plain text, credit card numbers and things like that. So without logging this type of information, we'd never be able to go back and sort of pinpoint like where did this actually take place and how may an attacker have exploited it. And of course your cloud services. So if you're hosting your email, Office 365, Gmail, things like that. If you've got things hosted in AWS, Azure, using them for your business applications, your hosted database services, all of these things are very, very important and becoming increasingly important as everything moves from on-prem to the cloud. Actually logging that information and storing it in a centralized location is ever more important to be able to perform investigations. All of this being said, it's for a lot of especially small organizations, this may seem like a lot. How are we going to store all of this? This is money. We've got to have the infrastructure. A lot of free and open source solutions for that, and storage is cheap. So, I would just say, work with a partner to figure out what is the best type of data. How can you prioritize what data you're going to store, and for how long, and how long you're able to do that, and make it happen, because it is exceedingly important in today's world. And that swings right into the next thing that you need for success, which is partnerships. So these can be things like partnerships with your software and product vendors, whether it's your AV or EDR vendors, different business software that you use. These folks can be exceedingly useful for helping you understand not only how to use their software and not only for troubleshooting it, but how best to do that, and maybe how best to feed it into things like your telemetry. How are you storing that data? What's important to store? And then consultants. So if you're utilizing consultants of any type, incident response, information technology, whatever it might be, these folks are really important to build relationships with, because when the proverbial ish hits the fan, you want to be able to lean on them and understand their expertise, and have a good working relationship with them to maybe be able to pretty quickly figure out whether or not you're doing something right or something's wrong. It can be highly valuable. I'll just point back to the instance where we had our IR firm consulted so many times where they were overloaded with the solar wind stuff that everyone's calling in looking for incident response support, so they couldn't take all of them on. But what they would do is give a glance, do a scoping call and figure out well, why do you think that you may be compromised? And in many cases they can just without even charging or doing anything, can just say, okay, you actually aren't running Orion, for instance, so you don't have to worry about it. Or what are you seeing? Oh, you're only seeing this AVS VM cloud DNS resolution, but none of the other indicators. Then you are probably fine, because pretty much everybody who has it's going to see that. And things like that can be very valuable, but they kind of require you to have built up a good relationship and good partnership with an organization. Threat intelligence, I mean, that's a big one that kind of builds right back into that. The folks who can help you really understand what's going on in the world is highly valuable. You want to have a trusted source of threat intelligence. I'm not talking to just things like threat feeds, things that are feeding you static indicators of compromise, but like folks who really know what they're talking about, know how to distill the things that are going on in the world and feed that back to you. Education and training, I think this is kind of a really important one because it feeds back into that cycle of understanding. So making sure that you have a good partnership with a firm who can help you ensure that your personnel are trained and qualified to do what they need to do. That can lead you to some of the very first steps in understanding, for instance, a SUNBURST compromise. To be able to read the reports and be able to distill that information themselves, and then immediately feed that right back into your organization and the understanding of what your threat exposure may actually be. And lastly, insurance. I throw this out there because it's probably going to seem a little weird to think that like you could have a partnership with an insurance provider, but really working with whether it's your physical or cyber insurance or whatever it may be, working with that agency to help them, or to be sure that they understand you as an organization and what your needs are, to make sure that you're tailoring whatever insurance that you have to your organization to best meet your goals. I think that's very important, and especially in the realm of cyber insurance, it really becomes important to make sure that you understand what kind of insurance you have, that you're not getting blindsided by something when, for instance, you have an incident response engagement that comes up and you need to consult an IR firm. Maybe that your cyber insurance ties you to using a specific set of IR firms or a singular IR firm. Those things are going to be very important partnerships to have over time. So with that, that kind of concludes my talk. So I just want to open up the floor for any questions from any of the audience.
So with the, I guess, are there data breaches that have went under the radar because they didn't have that big data? Those types
I would
of
say,
things?
yeah, I would say yes. I think that, well, I can't say for sure. Or, sort of big breaches like, the OPM hack and things like that. They, I would say that there was probably some level of that, that they either weren't monitoring that data, weren't collecting it properly, you know, and then found out after the fact. Forensics is useful when you're doing these things, but it's only as useful as what kind of data you have to be able to pull it back. And I would say that the more rapidly you can, you know, investigate a lead, look into something, the more data that you have there to be able to do that is going to allow you to bring that to light sooner. So I don't know that I can point offhand to any very specific ones. I don't want to highlight anything from our customer base that may have had that, but I mean, I can use an example of, it wasn't a big breach, you know, publicly, but we had an organization that I worked with who was they worked in the defense space, and they had, you know, we uncovered as soon as they onboarded as a customer, you know, we saw some suspicious activity from what we determined to be most likely the Chinese PLA, and we eventually uncovered, and we had to do a lot of forensic. We didn't have all the data available to be able to pull it back. Thankfully, what this organization did have was a previous investigation that had been conducted by the Air Force's OSI, sort of linking the same thing. And we found out that these folks had been lurking around in their networks for at least 4 years. But if they had been collecting all of the requisite data over time, we would have really been able to paint, I think, a very broad picture of what they had done. Because when we came into it, we basically just knew that they were there. So we weren't able to fully trace back all the things they had done, how exactly they had gotten in, things like that. And if that data had been available, we would have really been able to paint a better picture. Any other questions? It could be about anything, doesn't have to be related to specifically what I just talked about today. All right, well, it seems like no more questions. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, you know, for the time and the opportunity to be able to talk to you today. If you have any questions or anything later on after the fact, you can reach me, you know, at my email, Lonnie_best@rapid7.com. You visit our website, check out our blog. It's got lots of those resources, those reports that I referred to, some really cool you know, posts that we've put out related to some, like I said, the Exchange server compromises and a lot of the activity we've seen. And if you want to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. I live on that website a lot. I'm not a Twitter guy. So, you know, find me on there and I'm happy to connect.
Well, thank you, Lonnie. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you.
All right. May we stop the recording for a minute?
Yeah.